Malo mo lang mari ho ki bea malo le motor ko dobe me mai ki he programa ko ini ko kore be ki hu fanga mo ngai whakatapu ko dobe ko whaki ka ata ki whakahoko ata programa ko ini. This program, of course, is a program in English, and so I'm switching language now, and I wish to introduce to you our panel for this evening. I wish to apologize that our coordinator and usually the one that does the running of this program, Setitan, is unable to be with us tonight. So we have the remaining panels, and I want to introduce them to you. Firstly, we want to welcome Lopeti Senituli. Lopeti Senituli, a lawyer and also a political commentator, has been involved for quite some time in the reform movement and in many aspects of development here in Tonga. And then we also have Ikani Taliai. Ikani is a political analyst and a commentator. He is based out of Australia and, of course, has been working in Tonga during the time of the reform movement and has been quite involved in many different aspects of things in Tonga. Then we have our fourth panelist, Suliana Mone, Dr. Suliana Mone, a lawyer and a specialized field. She's a lecturer at the University of Auckland, in Auckland. And so it's great to have these panelists with us this evening. Let me just start off, and then we're going to have the panelists to join us. But recently there was a press conference that was held by the Prime Minister and the cabinet ministers with the journalists and media, particularly here in Tonga. And it was a very special and a very interesting press conference. First of all, I have been working in media for many years, and I cannot recall a time where there was a press conference that the Prime Minister includes other members of the cabinet to come in and be part of the press conference. So this was a very unusual but very good to include them. Usually it's the Prime Minister just doing the press conference. There were many issues that were brought up, and we want to be able to comment on some of those issues because they are issues that are national, issues that are concerning not just the area of governance and politics, very interesting issues that have been brought up from changes that this government is trying to make, issues of they discovering that there has been a violation of the rule of law, particularly when there were loans that were made from one fund to be used in another enterprise or ongoing government project. There's also has been issues where there have been a lack of accountability. They cannot trace how funds have been used and questions that were raised in that. Also interesting that there were discussions and talk about questions that were raised concerning, for example, like the Lulutai Airlines. I think the Lulutai Airlines is doing worse than it has been said. Worse in the sense that it's not only bankrupt, it's really needing millions of dollars to bail it out. However, this government has a solution for that, and we want to make commentary and sharing on that. Part of the dangers as I was listening to the press conference panelists is the fact that you usually as a media, a journalist, you think, wow, here a government gets into government and they start campaigning. They're just campaigning for the next election. And especially this government that has only now about what 8 months to go before the November election. But in listening to the things that have been shared, you have to give them the benefit of a doubt. There were some real important issues that needed to be discussed, and they have some solutions for it. Whether they are using that as a campaign, I think is another matter. The fact that they are issues that are affecting the people of Tonga today, and I'm appreciative that Setita has agreed for us to discuss it a little bit in our Lopeti, Senituli, and then we can go on from there. Lopeti, you have been sometimes as a quiet forefronter in some of the previous government, seeing the changes that has taken place. Can you comment, please, on the press conference, particularly the fact that they are promising and talking about changes that they are going to make? Changes in the way, for example, the way things have been handled in the civil service, even practical changes in relation to vehicles, in the importation of vehicles, changes that
Thank you.
have to do with the borrowing of funds and all. So I'd like for you to just please make a general comment on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Kalafi. Ko kore ke hufanga he whakatapu ka e tā ke ka wat ke he tau proklama e whewhi. First of all, I must give Prime Minister Eke and his government some credit because they've only been in government for a month. Eh? Remember, they only came into power
Mm-hmm.
in January. So it's only, I think it was 25th or 24th of January that they were sworn in and they became the government. And you've got to also accept the fact that this cabinet and this government is made up of a whole range of representatives. Eh? Some
Mm-hmm.
very, very strong royalists, some very, very strong pro democracy people, and some in between. And prior to the becoming together in this cabinet, they were on opposite sides on a couple of things. Eh? And it's quite obvious from the press conference. They have different styles of operation. Eh? Different ministers have their own style. So it will take a while before it gels. Eh? And I don't know whether this prime minister will like to keep the same cabinet for the upcoming, that is, keep the people's representatives that are in the cabinet of, that is, 7 out of the 11 are people's representatives. Eh? The other 4 are non-elected representatives. One of them, of course, is a member of the royal family, and the other 3 are professionals from in their particular field. Eh? So it's taking a while for them to gel and work as a team. Eh? And as some of the issues that they raised, it is quite clear that they have different interpretations of and different ideas of what to do. So it will take a while, and this is only a month. But one thing I'm quite happy about is that this prime minister and his ministers are very, very open to the media. Very, you can call them up and you can email them, and they will tell you what they want to say, what their response is. And because he's held quite a number of media conferences since he took office. And
Mm-hmm.
individual ministers I have heard individual ministers on the radio of different radio stations, right? 87.5, 88.6, the government radio stations. So I think it's very good. I think that's a good indication of a prime minister and cabinet that is willing to be open to public scrutiny. That's what I can say.
Mhm.
Huh?
Yes. Thank you, Lopeti. Ikani, what do you think?
Thank you, Kalafi, and thank you, Lopeti. I agree wholeheartedly with Lopeti's comments. All what I can add on this question is that it's interesting, as Lopeti said, that this is a collection of MPs in the cabinet who had come previously from different ideological backgrounds. The common factor of how they got here in the first place, I guess, is an alignment of views with His Majesty and the nobles about concerns with the former administration. So, uh, a group of differing ideological politicians saw that there was one issue that they could all align together under, and that's how we got here today. Then on top of that, as both of you mentioned, um, we are just about to hit the month of March. The elections are in November, so um, it's it would be very difficult for this current administration to behave in a normal sense, I guess, with forward planning and budgeting and so forth. But we do know that um, these individuals, including the Prime Minister, in all the commentary before the voting um, for Prime Minister, that their main task, amongst other things, but the main task was to review a whole heap of arrangements that the former administration had put in place, and that's emerged. I think the most recent press conference highlighted that, and yes, we hope that they can steady the ship and align things. I guess we can discuss it a little further in the program, but for me, what I'm particularly interested in is, and some people may have different views, but I think that this administration could also have an agenda of um, having a look at the reform issue. Because I personally, and I'm sure the two of you are, but I personally, at least, am an unashamed reformist, and I would love to see that would be part of this administration's agenda, albeit with the fact that they've only got a few months. So yeah, it's you could say that there is trust in the corruption sense. That there's a definite anti-corruption stance, which is great. So it seems their focus is on governing, not so much reforming, is what I could say, I guess.
Thank you, Ikani. I've got a couple of questions, but before I do that, let's go to Suliana and welcome her to make a comment before we go on. Dr. Suliana
Kalafikataki,
Mambo.
Suliana can't make it.
Okay, okay. I'm sorry, Suliana is unable to be here. But just for you guys, the question that I want to bring out based on your comments, do you think that this government, just the way they've been reflected in the last, since they came into power, gives us a bit of hope of what could be for the future in terms of working together? That between the monarchy, the nobility, the people who are very active in the reformist movement, and those who may have maintained another view. Do you think this is a possibility that we haven't seen before, of the possibility of really everybody coming together and working together to take us forward? What do you think on that? Let's go back to Lopeti.
Yeah, thank you, Kalafi. It's difficult to actually see how they are going to work. As we all saw during the vote, the first parliamentary vote that this cabinet and prime minister faced, which was on whether or not the minister of police should be allowed to make his swearing in the English language. Yeah? And they lost because they split. There are different ideas. And on top of that, the rest of the cabinet was surprised about the Minister of Police's proposal. Yeah? They had not been warned beforehand that this is what he was going to do, because it was very clear when the speakers asked the House, is there any seconder for this particular motion? No one spoke in favor because they were all caught by surprise. It was only later on when one of the ministers then spoke in favor of the motion. And the speaker was not very happy. The speaker said, look, I already asked you whether or not there was a seconder, and no one said anything. So this is what is happening. And I think the Prime Minister should select an issue on which the whole cabinet is agreeable, right, as a starting point. And he should stay on issues on which the whole cabinet agrees upon it. And I think that's what he should do. I'm sure the anti-corruption, the drugs issue, because I do know the Minister of Agriculture has spoken about his ideas about the use of pesticides, and how he wants to enforce stringent requirements for the application of pesticides by farmers in Tonga. He wants to introduce that. But I'm not too sure whether the other ministers understand or even agree with the kind of thinking that he has. Right? Remember, the whole issue of pesticides became a big issue with when the how you say the export crop, the
Squash, you mean?
what do you call it again? Eh?
The squash. That was it. The squash.
Yes, the squash. The
Yeah.
squash. You see, the seeds of the squash are manufactured with. They will only grow if you use the pesticides. I know this because at Tonga Community Development Trust, we started the PASA program, which was the anti-pesticides. And we hired a former a deputy CEO of the Ministry of Agriculture, who just died last year, Ofa Whakalata, to head that project, encouraging farmers not to use pesticides in their squash. But the farmer said, no, without the pesticides, we won't get a harvest. Or if we do get a harvest, it will be very, very, very minor. So these are the things that the Prime Minister has to really get all his ministers. He should identify the issues which all his ministers agree on and work on those.
Yes.
And I think, well, one of the favorite issues that I've been campaigning for is the dialogue between His Majesty and the Prime Minister and Cabinet about the overlaps in executive powers, where the executive authority of the Prime Minister that has devolved to him and Cabinet in 2010, and the executive powers that are still with His Majesty remained in His Majesty's hands, either through the Constitution or through other legislation. That the prime example is this issue about the commissioner of police. We have a commissioner of police appointed by Australia, funded by Australia at the moment, and we have a minister of police appointed by the prime minister and is answerable to cabinet. And according to the law, the commissioner of police is answerable only, is independent totally from the minister and cabinet. He's only answerable to the king and the law lords who had appointed him. Now, there are a lot of good young policemen that should be groomed to take over the position of commissioner of police. We are strong enough to localize the post of commissioner of police. And look at the young people that have been trained. They have taken up by UNDP, they have been taken up by Australian police, etc. And they've left. And yet we are stuck with foreigners who continue to be our commissioners. Those are the sort of things that I think that should be the priority issues, although they may not all agree, but that's my wishful thinking. Thank you.
Ikani, what's your commentary on that?
Your question, Kalafi, was whether this current administration, this collection that has become this administration, is an example of how things could work in Tonga. My view is that despite the obvious fact that there are some good people in the cabinet, some capable people with good moral character, while that is factually accurate, I tend to think that it becomes a little bit of wishful thinking that all we need to do is find good people and therefore we will be governed well. I think it is more than that, because if your structure doesn't allow for governance to operate at its potential, it doesn't matter how good the people are, they're going to find difficulty within the system eventually. But I think the shared power arrangement, which that's what this administration is. I think this is the first time we've actually had that since the changes of 2010. So, to be fair, they need to be given a chance. But my feeling from just a theoretical and practical view of political science and the history of how politics and democracy and governance works, if there isn't a concerted effort to equally give some time to reform matters, it may become a failed experiment. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's still the changes of 2010 are still an experiment, because this whole notion, a lot of people, and I understand the feeling behind it, that we need to find a Tongan version of democracy. That's fine. And in finding a Tongan version of democracy, what do we actually mean? Do we mean what's actually happening now? So in answering your initial question, is this administration an example of Tongan democracy? We yet to see the results. So as Lopeti mentioned, there are some little, already some little disagreements that have appeared within the cabinet. So we'll see what transpires.
Yes. I just want to comment on this Tongan democracy issue, Ikani. I'm thinking that probably A Tongan democracy is a democratic form of governance that is able to operate well within the social environment of our culture, meaning that it will be able to harmoniously operate with the king as a vital part of our society, with the nobles as a vital part of our society, with the church also as a major force in our society, church and religion, and all the other aspects or spheres in our society will be able to function together harmoniously. Oh, of course, there'll be disagreements, there'll be adjustments they need to make. But I think that those that are calling for a Tongan form of democracy is a democracy that has a banner over it of Tongan culture.
A democracy,
Whether that's possible or not, I don't know.
a democracy with Tongan characteristics. Is that what you mean?
Tongan characteristics, yes. That's a wonderful way of saying it. Yes.
So would you
One of
describe
the things,
Kalafi that? Sorry to
I
interrupt, Kalafi.
remember
Would
a
you
couple of
what?
things.
Yeah,
I
what you just
remember,
described.
and I mentioned this already. I mentioned this already in the previous program in the Tongan language. Back in 2010, before the actual election that year that chose Tuigano as the prime minister, this two gentlemen from this British company called Bell's Pottinger, and Bell's Pottinger has helped or assisted a lot of newly independent countries to write their new constitution. The same way that this Yash guy from the Hong Kong University helped a number of Pacific Island countries write their constitution. Yash guy helped Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Vanuatu, and Bell's Pottinger came. They didn't help put together our constitution because our constitution was based on the consultations that was held first by the NCPR, the National Commission, Parliamentary NCRP, which was headed by that Stephen Halapua and folks. And then after it was their report that was being presented to Parliament in November 2006, and as a result, the supporters of the pro-democracy movement went on strike. Went on rampage, and we had destruction of the Nuku'alofa CBD. And then the CEC, the Constitutional and Electoral Commission, was set up, headed by Chief Justice Gordon Ward, and included some of the members of the previous commission, the Tuipehake. Remember the Tuipehake commission, And Tuipehake, of course, died in San Francisco. But anyway, I went with Bell's Pottinger people to Polataane, and my instructions given by Dr. Fred Severe was to accompany these two to meet with His Majesty King George V. And when we got there, and the discussions went on, and then these guys asked His Majesty point blank, "Is this the most democratic constitution? Is this the perfect constitution?" And His Majesty, he smiled and he had a twinkle in his eye, and he said, "Only God's creation is perfect. This constitution is made by human beings, and it is a result of the consultation between the people of Tonga, not only in Tonga, but also amongst the diaspora, and this is the outcome of that commission's report and their recommendations, and which was voted on by Parliament." So this is what we think is the most democratic constitution now in 2010. And then he said, who knows? A few years down the line, our generation of leaders then will say, hey, this is not democratic. We want change. So George V was understanding that democracy moves, democracy adjusts to the times and the economy, etc. So it can change. So what is regarded as democratic today in Tonga may not be democratic in the future. What is regarded as democratic in Fiji is not democratic in Tonga, you see. So that's my answer, that there is room for change. And I think that this Prime Minister should make that as one of his priorities in the preparation for the elections. Thank you.
Ikani?
Yeah, no, I concur with Lopeti in the idea that dialogue is most important. And I think for today, a practical application of dialogue could be the current administration supporting the idea of having another convention. So, I mean, having a convention doesn't mean you're forcing down a particular model on people. It's actually what Lopeti says, it's having a dialogue to discuss the further enhancements of what we want best for the country. So, bringing Lopeti's idea and the history of the journey, the democratic journey of Tonga, I think it's time that we do have another convention, because the most famous convention in 1992 wasn't supported, from my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding that the government of the day wasn't really supportive of that convention because the changes hadn't happened yet. So you could see, I forget the particular pillar, Lopeti, in the Tonga Strategic Development Framework. There's a particular pillar in there that describes, I sent it to Kalafi, that describes something like an objective to do with governance reform and so forth. So it seems that there is already documented ideas about ongoing reform. It just needs to be activated. I think the toxicity of the environment in general hasn't helped, but I really do think that this current administration has an opportunity to do exactly what Lopeti's saying, make it a priority, and it is in their authority right now to push that, including like the Tonga Human Rights and Democracy Office, because today is different from 1992.
I think, Ikani, one of a statement you made, which I think is extremely important to be noted. I think it was in one of the programs we've had. You said that one of the big mistakes we make is looking at the 2010 reform as the end rather than the beginning. In other words, it's like, wow, we've achieved it, and now we sit back and let it just grow by itself. But he said it's the beginning, and I think I agree wholeheartedly that's very important. If we don't see that as a beginning, we won't participate in the ongoing reform, the ongoing adjustments and adaptations that needs to take place. It's just like life. When life begins, you don't say, wow, we've gotten there, we've arrived. No, there are years that there needs to be growth, there needs to be changes, there are struggles, there are sometimes problems that takes place, but we resolve it, but we keep moving. We don't go back. I mean, when a teenager offends, you don't send him back to the womb, don't you?
Yeah, no, I agree, because
you keep going.
Lopeti said exactly the same thing. We need to keep improving. And your reference to 2010 as mistakenly say that it's the end. I think it's fair to say there was what you would call a reform fatigue that happened after 2010, because people forget getting to 2010 took decades of people getting involved in trying to push it. So yes, sorry, Lopeti, I jumped in there.
Yeah.
No,
Lopeti, do you
no,
have
no,
anything else
that's
to
right.
say on that unless we go into another subject?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to say that I'm aware of various articles printed in the media, Tongan media, and also in social media by Tongans in Tonga and also overseas, and giving the impression that Akalisi was anti-monarchy. That is not correct.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Akalisi was strongly in favor of the monarchy and retaining the monarch and retaining the crucial role of the nobles and their seats. In fact, we clashed a couple of times on that issue, but he was very, very strong on that. And he was in favor of retaining the monarch. But we have seen how we need to review that now, given what has happened in the last 15 years. So we need to. The other thing we got to remember is that we have what we call an act already adopted by Parliament. It's called the Law Reform Commission. Yeah? Now,
Mm.
it has not been implemented yet, although it's been adopted by Parliament. In other countries, the Law Reform Commission keeps the Prime Minister and his cabinet informed of the need for changes in law according to what has happened in the country.
Mm.
It has not been implemented. And that's what we need. We need a law reform commission that taps on the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice. Hey, we got to amend this legislation. Like the Anti-Corruption Commission Act was first adopted in 2004. It was only implemented in 2024, 20 years later.
Mm.
So it's very important that we get the
Mm.
Prime Minister to implement these sorts of things and to move the country forward. Yeah? If
Mm.
they help the machinery of government and they help the government of the day, the Law Reform Commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission, etc. And I think this Prime Minister should make that one of his targets, priorities.
Mm. Yes. Yes. One of the things that it was brought up at the press conference, and the Prime Minister have brought it up in a couple of his speeches, is basically his call for change in the way we administer things within government. And during the latest press conference, one of the things that was talked about is how, for example, you can have funding that is brought from overseas, brought into the country for one thing and then used for something else. I understand there was a funding that was brought in for the museum, for example, and instead of being used for a new museum, it went to the Tonga National University. And I think one of the explanations that was brought up was that when that funding was given, government was given the freedom to use it wherever most needed at the time. But anyway, that's what happened to that particular funding. But one of the things that was brought up is the trust fund. I'd like us to talk a little bit about that, and because the trust fund has been on the news quite a bit. And I did not know until the recent press conference that there are actually two trust funds or retirement funds. There is what they call the Government Retirement Fund, and then there's also the National Retirement Benefits Fund, NRBF. Two different funds with two different boards and CEOs handling it. But one of the things that came up is from one of these funds. There has been money that have been borrowed. That I think Lulutai Airlines is one of the things that benefited from the borrowing from one of these funds. Government civil servants that are borrowing from the government retirement fund are now required that they pay 25% before they can borrow from the fund. And there's an outstanding, for example, of a lot of civil servants that can't pay back what they borrowed from the fund. But anyway, that's something that has been brought up, and I appreciate this government for their transparency in bringing out a lot of things that was not publicly known. I'd love some commentary on that from maybe start off with Lopeti.
Yeah. First of all, about the funding from the Arabs for the museum. And in fact, the museum building has been constructed. Whether it has become a museum yet is not, I don't know, I have not visited. But there is a building, a new building, right next door to Princess Pililevu's former residence in opposite the villa. Yeah. Now, that museum was built last year, but remember, we already had a National Museum and Cultural Center funded by the Japanese. Yeah. And the Japanese
Yes.
funded this National Museum and Cultural Center opposite the Viola Hospital. And
That's
then, of
correct.
course, we had the big cyclone in 2018, which destroyed the parliamentary building in Suva, in Nuku'alofa. And as a result, Parliament then was relocated temporarily, that was the word they used, temporarily, to the cultural center. Now, it's 7 years later, it is still there. And I don't know what the Japanese are saying about, hey, we built this as a cultural center. Remember that museum, they had a complete outrigger canoe inside the building. They had displays of past cultural artifacts. Now that was all shifted out to make room for the parliament building. And I don't know where those cultural and museum artifacts have gone, but I do know some of them have been stolen and some of them have ended up overseas. But that is the one of the, how do you say, that is one of the vagaries of being a beggar. You don't have money. So when emergency happens, you take emergency action temporarily, but it's 7 years now. And of course, we've heard that New Zealand and Australia have agreed to build a new Parliament House, and hopefully that will happen in the next government's lifetime, so that the Parliament can move out of the cultural center. And but of course, what happened with the cultural center, Parliament used the main building, which was the museum, and then Lavu School used the other buildings. Now, one of those buildings is used by Peseti Maafu's restaurant and for catering, etc. So these are things that we need to. Yeah. And the other thing about the reserve funds, you're right, there are two different funds. I didn't realize that there were two different funds. One is for government employees, including, and that is the National Retirement Fund. And the other fund is for non-governmental employees and can include casual workers, they who wants to be part of this. And I don't see why they need two different funds with two different executive boards, two different employees, when surely the money cannot be billions and billions of dollars. So I don't think it's necessary to have two retirement funds. But the issue of accessing those funds, one of those, the funds from which this government or the previous government has taken money for use in the Lulutai airline is from the National Retirement Fund. And the chairman of the executive board is the prime minister, who also happens to be the chairman of the Lulutai Airlines. So there you go. You have a conflict of interest right from the beginning there. So now they've made the Lulutai a statutory body and no longer a private company. But we will see whether they are able to pay back that money to the National Retirement Fund. Malo.
Malo Lopeti, one of the first questions that came to me when I heard about the museum was the question of what happened to the old museum. It's like it's not even in the conversation nowadays. You're talking about the new museum; it's already constructed. There's money needed to, I guess, equip it and put things in there. And I asked the questions: what happened to the old museum? I used to take tourists to the old museum, friends of mine from overseas, to see the old museum. And the last time I took a group of people there, it was open. There was nobody there, and there were things in there that was just thrown in everywhere. I mean, it was just like abandoned. And this brings out a point that I'd like here the comment on Ikani. We have so many things in Tonga that we build and it fail, and we just go on and build another one. I mean, we did have an airline. It was called the Royal Tonga Airlines. It failed, but we somehow we have an addiction. We have to have an airline, and we got Lulutai. Now it's failing. Are we going to come up with another airline? What happened? How did they fail? What can we do to correct the failures of the past so that we can move on and adapt and do new things creatively and progressively? Could you please comment on that?
Thanks, Kalafi. I think specifically for your question, it comes down to a lack of understanding of economic ideology, because talking about democracy or monarchy or that's political ideology. The concentration by government of particular businesses comes down to what policy ideology in regard to economics a system has. So you can have conservative economic ideas, you can have liberal economic ideas. The liberal side is where you go towards the socialist, and that's where the state tends to own and run things. And then you go to the right, that's where they want less government and they want a more of a free market. So Tonga really, it seems to me, hasn't had a discussion what is the best balance. Because the way we are going, for the example of Lulutai, where, as Lopeti says, they're going to turn it into a statutory body, that's socialist economics ideology. So is that where we're heading? So understanding that gives us a better toolkit to decide what fits best. So I think we have a prime minister now who is also the Minister of Finance, and he has a deeper understanding of economics than most. So it's just a matter of, is he someone who promotes more of a free market and allowing the private enterprise to flourish and take over and government just regulates? Or is he going to go along the vein of grabbing like the entity of Lulutai and turn that into another public enterprise? So answering your question, it's a matter of economic ideology. And maybe Tonga is also going through trying to find out what is Tonga's best economic ideology with Tongan characteristics, just like the politics. So it's not just the political structure, it's the economic structure at the same time. If I can just jump back to the museum topic,
Yes.
I don't know if you realise that one of the earliest, if not the first, organised museums Tonga ever had was developed by Te Boa College, and it still exists today. And they arguably had the largest collection of genuine Tongan artifacts, not newly constructed pieces. And that was historically as missionaries had collected artifacts, either gifts by notable Tongans, and they donated it back. In the early 1980s, I recall that the government of the time confiscated a lot of those items. And the original National Museum that you spoke about, Kalafi, they inherited all those confiscated items. Where they are, who knows? So to me, that's another example of, do we allow bureaucracy to control entities? We need to decide on what is the best structure for various sectors in society. Should there be a independent body funded by government that takes care of our artifacts, because they are important and precious? Because history has shown us government doing it. I shudder to think at how many items have been stolen and lost. You can't retrieve them anymore. So it's a conversation about, it's a structural conversation. So a convention, I go back to a convention, allowing that to all our, because we've got brilliant minds out there, Tongans, have them come in on the conversation and discuss things on political structure, economic structure. I think that's what's missing. And it goes back to what Lopeti has said repeatedly, dialogue. And having a structured dialogue in this kind of, I think it's time that happens. I think that answers a lot of questions, Kalafi.
Yes, very, very much so. We're coming to the end of our time, but there's just a couple of things that I'd like to throw out there, maybe a comment or two from you guys. One of the things that came up in the press conference was a real concern for the importation of vehicles. And instead of just going out and saying we ban all vehicles now that are over 10 years old, they're giving a grace period of 10 years before they come down on 10 years of 1 year. I'm sorry, for people to adjust. The Minister of Revenue and Customs, Martin Itapueruelu, did mention that there are people that have called up asking for help because they've already got shipment of their vehicles, and apparently those vehicles are over 10 years old. They be given a leeway. And with that, there was an expression of a real concern for the junk vehicles that are just discarded everywhere in Tonga. And apparently there are 3 companies that are set up to ship some of those vehicles for recycling upstairs, recycling overseas. As they were talking about it, the question of Tapuhia came up. And Tapuhia was constructed with the aim that it will take 50 years before they need to have a new one. And the minister basically said, "Hey, it's at a maximum limit right now." And photos of Tapuhia, being able to go up there to see it, it's really at a very dangerous situation. They're even asking the water department to start assessing the water quality in the area near Tapuhia because of that. So we've got some real challenging issues there, and maybe just to finish off our program here, you might like to comment on some of the issues.
Yeah. Thank you, Kalafi. Can I just start with a comment on the diversion of funds meant for the museum being diverted to the Tonga National University? I'm concerned that there are several university initiatives that are being already operating. Remember, we have USP, we have now the Tonga National University, we have the Christ University of the Pacific of the Tokai Kolo Church. We also have Atenisi University, which I'm sure they're having a dispute of whether or not they have received certification as a university or even as an institution. And then the Free Wesleyan Church is talking about its own university opening next year to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the arrival of the Christian missionaries. So you have already at least 5 universities in a small country with a population of 100,000 competing for students. And I had asked Dr. Ungatea Kata, who is responsible for developing the Free Wesleyan Churches universities. She said she had approached the Sovaleni government for them to work together to creating only one university, the government and the church. And they were not interested, or if they were interested, they were not showing any keenness. So that's my criticism of the proliferation of universities for small student population. The country of 110,000 at the most. And I think it's a waste of money to have these 5 universities. The other issue that you mentioned about Tapuhia, I was part of the working group that worked on the creation of Tapuhia way back in 2004, 2005, almost 25 years ago. And we helped advise the Australian crowd that came to set it up. They had very beautiful plan. They had a plan for separation of the bottles and plastics and the waste, household waste, which you can be recycled. It can be used for. But now, no, it is not happening. Everything is still dumped together. And the villages out around the Tapuhia area, they are complaining, not only from the stench, but they also, remember, their water source is the same area on which Tapuhia is located. So they say 50 years, this is 20 years down the line, and they are already in trouble. So we need to relocate. We have to think of other waste dumps, like the one in Vava'u. Yeah? Remember, the one in Vava'u was created also around the same time. They are also complaining. The villages around there are also complaining. So why can't we ask the village, the Vahenga Hihifo, to have their own waste disposal system to ensure that it is manageable? Let's not make it into a big national issue. The final things I want to comment on is with the importation of vehicles. The importation of vehicles, one of the problems is that the Tongan government at the moment has 2 standards. One is for households that want to import vehicles. If, for example, my brother in Australia wants to send me a used vehicle, under the law, as under the customs law now, it cannot be more than 5 years old. But for the importation by companies, for example, a farmer for use in his in the in his farming, the vehicle can be up to 10 years or more. You see the double standards? That's why the individuals that want to import, may offer. People can't afford vehicles. So, may offer my now family, pagatoy pe ke totonge tu hau mo fereti. Pe koe palapana mani ko o mai koe whireti. Tānaki atu ia, it costs 7,000, at least 7,000, almost 10,000 to import, even though you didn't pay for it. But the alpha my whole family. So this is the reason why I support the government's idea that there is a 12-month period for which the dialogue with the people should happen about what should be done. Malo.
Thank you, Lopeti. And in conclusion, I'd like to hand it over to Ikani for your final comments.
Thank you, Kalafi. Just very quickly, I think I've only got time to talk about, as an analogy, the issue of the importation of cars, of vehicles. I think basically this is a matter of the balance that a government administration has to, the tightrope that they have to walk along, which is presenting to the public ideas that are popular, because in a democracy, you need to be popular to be elected, versus identifying a problem, and in the case of a national setting, problems that have a national impact. Solutions for those problems are sometimes not popular, and vice versa. Sometimes popular ideas do not address the problem. And just very quickly, there are two examples, and I'll use Australia as an example. Back in the very early 80s and late 70s, the idea of superannuation developed. The idea of legislating retirement funds for the population, and it was initially very unpopular. However, the Hawke-Keating government, so they were the Labor government, which is the left, not the right, the left. The Liberals here are the right. They took a long-term view and pushed through legislation at the time, something that was unpopular. To date, Australia has benefited from those from those courageous policy decisions. On the other side, the Liberal government, which is the Conservatives, the right, the John Howard government, there was a gun shooting here in Australia, in Tasmania. I think it was the 90s, and there was a massacre, and there was a very unpopular push in policy by the Liberal government to reform the gun law, the gun law legislation in the country, where the Prime Minister even had to walk around in public with a bulletproof vest. However, even though it was unpopular, he pushed it, and Australia has benefited today. So, bringing that back to Tonga, as you rightly said before, Kalafi, Tonga faces a lot of challenges. And it becomes a balance for a government to ensure that you are addressing ideas and policies that are popular, but at the same time, there needs to be some courage to push through ideas that may not be popular in the public, but if you're pushing it through in a legislative way, benefits the country as in the long term. The best way to address something like that, and I'm going to keep repeating this, the best way is dialogue, open public dialogue in something like a convention, so that the good ideas and the true description of problems emerge in an open setting, so that you're giving people the opportunity to exercise their voice, but at the same time, there's transparency in discussing the ideas to solve the problems of the nation. Thank you, Kalafi.
Thank you so much, Ikani and Lopeti, for this wonderful program. And we want to also extend our thanks to Setita and RTTI for having this program. Setita, get well and come back. And we also want to Suliana, Dr. Suliana Mone, to join us again next week at the same time for this program. Thank you. Malo Obito, Kamumea.